came out in the news later and turned out. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about Joe Biden possibly having some issues 4 years before the world is. We're talking about cloned meat when it really is like we're having conversations that are historically significant. And so all of that is only trumped by the fact that we don't know what Trump will do tomorrow that we have to discuss because he's doing something world changing, you know? So it keeps it current and fresh.
Are you concerned about things like that too, though? Like where the world is at right now? The Trump era, the administration, or you just more what your world is, your audience, your family?
We're all affected by the same things. Like, if you didn't vote for him, he's still your president. Like, he's still doing that job. So, you know, it applies for all of us. These are human issues. Laughing is a human response to pain and turmoil, and we are all going through that at some level, you know? So that's what makes it universal.
Why are you not concerned with the comedy for like the fraternities? Like all the comedians that kind of get together, you know, and you're not a part, nor do you want to be in those fraternities. Not that that doesn't concern you, but why do you make sure you don't join the comedy fraternities of my partner, my boy, my girl, my this, my that?
It's far more likely that they weren't interested in me first. And one of the great superpowers in my life has been my ability to no longer want something I can't have. So the second I can't have it, I didn't want it anyway. And I mean that to the bone marrow. Like, you couldn't give it to me now, whatever it is we're discussing. So I have that. I have a whole fraternity of comedic individuals that benefit and thrive in a place where there is no baby oil. You know?
Man, you have changed like a lot of the, not just the narrative, but there's things that you will say, and I'm not even a comic reader. And if I just scroll down,
What's so special about Shake Shack's cooking?
It's actual cooking.
Before November of 1952, with the test known as Ivy Mike, the first hydrogen bomb, you know, there's like before Christ and after Christ, and they're just very different. Suddenly, we were like gods. And that is the BC AD of human history. That's much more important than the birth of Christ.
What is the difference between the nuclear weapon as it originally was and the second generation, the hydrogen bomb, etc.?
Well, there was no point to duck and cover. I mean, you weren't going to survive this thing. My guess is that one or two devices means that Los Angeles is no more. No one is interested in the idea that the solar system is an escape room and that Einstein is our jailer. We've got to get past Einstein before the thing goes off. We're on the eve of destruction and take a Jewish attitude, which is survival at all costs. This is the end. This is the apocalypse.
Eric, welcome back to Chicken Luncheon.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
It's great to have you back on. We've had 3 previous conversations, all of them extremely popular with our audience. People loved it. But the one thing that we've always felt that they've missed out is some of the conversations we've had with you in private.
We really shouldn't talk about that.
we should talk about some of the
Okay,
conversations.
some of the conversations.
And some of the conversation we've had in private is actually about geopolitics, and particularly how all of that is informed by the invention of first nuclear weapons and then thermonuclear weapons. It's interesting that
About to do a little exercise and smoke. Looking for something entertaining this morning.
It's
The left is losing it.
time for Lefties Losing It, and we really need to check in on the ladies of The View. It's been too long, and I've missed the weapon grade hate and bile masquerading as tolerance and considered analysis. Here is Sunny Hostin before the Super Bowl claiming that if you don't love Bad Bunny, and if perhaps you think there may be some better options for the Super Bowl halftime show, well, you're racist.
And so Bad Bunny, while he speaks Spanish, as Anna does, as I do, we're all Americans. It is so very racist what is happening in this country about Bad Bunny. That's just broader thing of things. That's one
Is your name
thing.
Damien?
It's just racism.
And after the rather underwhelming performance that the bulk of the audience did not even understand and arguably did not enjoy, we had Sunny Hostin with this hot take about Bad Bunny.
Understand or speak Spanish to feel the joy and to feel the unity and the message of inclusivity.
Staying with The View, and they really do have a talent for finding guests that are even crazier than the host. And this next dude fits the bill, Kentucky Democrat Governor Andy Beshear, who claims it is his Christian faith that makes him promote kids having access to trans treatments.
We rarely talk about the why. People want to know what drives us, especially in a world with social media where everyone's looking for the next authentic thing. For me, that's my faith.
Left is
Most of the
losing
decisions I
it.
make are based on that golden rule that says we love our neighbor as ourselves.
Yeah.
And that parable of the Good Samaritan that says everyone is our neighbor. And so when I've taken actions like vetoing the nastiest piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation that ever came through my state, I described it in those terms. I said my faith teaches me that all children are children of God. And I didn't want people picking on those kids.
Sweet baby Jesus, they are not picking on these kids. Muppet, they are protecting them. Read the research, Andy. You are complicit in inflicting irreversible harm on confused kids, and using your faith as an excuse is frankly a little sick. Now, to be clear, the nastiest piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation, as Governor Beshear calls it, this is what it does. It bans so-called gender-affirming care for minors. That's irreversible treatments, including surgeries. Keeps boys out of girls' restrooms and requires schools to tell parents if their child is experiencing gender dysphoria. That's what he calls the nastiest piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation. Now, the left, including members of The View, are very alarmed at the hundreds of...
I mean, it was a little underwhelming, but it was okay. What'd you think?
jobs being slashed at the Washington Post, which is a propaganda outlet these days for the Democrats. Yes, the left are very agitated, but it wasn't long ago when the ladies of The View were urging Washington Post readers to cancel their subscriptions.
Cheers,
So far, 200,000 people have canceled their Washington Post subscription over the decision to block the editorial board from endorsing Vice President Harris.
As a message to Jeff Bezos, and I will say, in this election, we're normalizing a bigoted, fascist, racist. These opinions matter even more.
Oh, what short memories they have. Of course, the editorial board not endorsing Kamala Harris meant nothing because everything that they pumped out.
Yeah, a lot of people were saying that the Super Bowl would have been more interesting if it was the Bills versus the Seahawks. Probably. Seems like the Patriots team must have got lucky this year. Or something like that.
Is biased anti-Trump and anti-Republican. Now, this lefty losing it is genuinely disappointing because Andrew Schultz is funny and clever, well, mostly clever. Alas, he fell for all the misinfo and BS pushed by the activist class. He might as well dye his hair green and add pronouns to his bio. He has lost the plot.
But I will say that this was a breaking point for me in the way that the administration responded to it. Like, I didn't think what's happening right now with ICE could happen in America. I genuinely did not think.
I feel like flour is a little more harsh. I don't know. I like the taste better. A lot more flavorful. But it's also stinkier, so I have to worry about my like management walking by my door, smelling my dank.
That was possible. I thought our institution, I thought the Constitution would hold up. When I see it and then immediately defend it, I start to go, we gotta be very loud about this. Like, it all of a sudden becomes not like liberal catastrophic thinking. It starts to become very reasonable, nuanced criticism of the administration. They have just made the most far left critiques of the Trump administration. Their reaction to this has just justified all of them.
No, they have not, Andrew. Dear me. He has obviously given in to all the bullying from...
Start by handing me your phone. Something doesn't feel right. You gotta break a few eggs.
There's no way out.
You pull that trigger.
Gonna do a little stretching this morning.
Back to what matters. Meet the Reputation 2, our most comfortable, quiet, and dependable all-season tire. Built for commutes.
Today's guest is a comedian and an actor. You'll know him from everywhere, from Grown Ups, King of Queens, Chuck and Larry, Paul Blart. His new movie is out that's right now in theaters. It's called Solo Mio, and it's great if you want to go check it out. But right now, let's get to know Mr. Kevin James. That's my coffee cup right there. Con Dios todos es posible.
Posible. It is, yeah. What is the
Hot
middle word?
boxed in a car?
Todo es.
Shit.
Todo es. Todo es.
Fucking years, man.
Everything is? That's cool.
With God, everything is possible. What does yours say?
Mine's pretty, I just have no answers. That's what it comes down to.
Oh, yours is one of those Mad Lib mugs, huh?
Each day is something different.
That's Italian, but almost sounds a little bit Italian, like your movie.
It does. It is very close. Dio.
Deal? Like Rodney James Dio, like Lock Up the Wolves?
Yes, yes. But much different. Yeah.
Lock Up the Wolves. You ever listen to that?
Yeah. I remember him. I mean, he was crazy, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he's yelling Lock Up the Wolves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You can't not be crazy and yell Lock Up the Wolves.
God, that album. My brother used to beat me with his music.
It makes sense.
You remember your first concert ever or no?
Yeah, it was Kiss.
Oh.
I saw Kiss in, it was like, right after I think...
This is already boring. I'd rather listen to fucking medieval fucking history, man. Back when shit was interesting. I swear my recommended section doesn't even know me anymore. What is all this shit?
double shift needs extra stress sweat. You need Secret Clinical. It gives you 3 times sweat protection. Oh, I know that stuff.
It's caramel apple dream tea mixed with sleepy time vanilla. Hey, thanks for the like.
I could just see there wasn't really any point. And from what was being said to the newspapers, there was a cohort of people at Talk Sport and also in the building who thought I was a bit of a bigot, a bit of a racist anyway, and they weren't very happy with some of the things I said every day, which I'd never been told about, you know. So it all kind of came to an end, and eventually I actually asked them to fire me effectively, because I was like, you know, are you gonna, you know, I'll get off the pot, if you pardon the expression, because 4 weeks had gone by, I wasn't making any money, and according to them, I wasn't suspended. And so my lawyers were going, well, if you're not suspended, you should be paying it. But no.
Do you know what happened with that Facebook post?
I really don't. No, I mean, the best I can imagine is that somebody accessed the account somehow remotely. We managed to find a few kind of logins from a year before, 6 months before, from places I hadn't been. I didn't have 2-factor the cybersecurity guy brought in, so I can't believe how unprotected your account was, given how high profile you are and how high risk you are. You know, somebody from the cyber team at News UK gave me a memo when I was called in to say, this is how you can secure your account. And I was like, I was a bit late now. You know, maybe you should have given me that last year. So I really don't know, and nobody knows. I mean, everybody on Twitter, you know, the land of experts, like, it's easy to prove that you didn't do it. Just show them the login, and that somebody will be shown to have logged in. Well, there wasn't anybody there. And I don't understand enough about cyber hacking. I do know that people get hacked all the time. People get their Twitter accounts hacked all the time at the moment. You keep getting these messages from people saying, please vote for me on this podcast. And then something terrible happens, you know. Major companies are getting hacked every day. And, you know, if I was to be a conspiracy theorist, I would say somebody was out to get me. Because, you know, a couple of weird things happened to me in the previous 2 months. I had my back window smashed in my car and nothing.
Not really, kinda. I used to. Not really watch anymore. But I'd say kinda. I more like to play basketball, but I really don't like to play. I mean, I like to play by myself. Like, I like to just like shoot like free throws and like, you know. What's up, OG?
And the idea that TalkSport would be progressive, that they would be offended by something you said, just boggles the mind, really.
Well, that would have been true maybe 10 years ago, but not now, because now
And with the financials, the left is getting people killed, Michael Schoenberg.
Minneapolis has become the center of all.
I chose the Cornell Johnson MBA program because of the differentiating factor of community, who you have access to.
Minneapolis has become.
Doing a little smoking. Doing a little squats to start the day off.
Of us, you've sort of hinted at them.
I don't think there was any serious thought among the
How's your
Trump
day going?
administration for the reaction to these raids and the consequences of them.
He shouldn't have been there antagonizing police.
I think they're using people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy as essentially cannon fodder, convincing them that they're fighting Nazis, giving them an opportunity to be heroes in their own minds, but essentially leading them to their deaths. There's blood on the hands of the left, in which I would include, you know, virtually all of the Democratic Party and the mainstream news media.
Biden expelled up to 4 million. Obama, at least 3 million. George W. Bush, 10 million if you include returns. Why then this sudden different tack to...
Yep, just starting my day off, pretty much.
Is at his most successful strategically, he's using the left. But when they err strategically, that radicalized left then represents the majority of Americans, and that's when Trump, I think, find themselves in real trouble politically. It's the kind of thing that would result in them losing the White House.
Before we get into this interview, I just wanted to say that we have noticed that more than half of our regular viewers are not subscribed. If you want to support the Winston Marshall Show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, we can have more phenomenal guests exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. But without further ado, on with the interview. Michael Schellenberger, welcome to the show. Minneapolis has seemingly become the center of all America's attention and somewhat of the clash between, perhaps you would call it MAGA versus progressivism. I'm not sure exactly, but we have had two horrifying killings, which has split America somewhat, and this is because of the ICE agents attempting to do deportations. I think most people, not just in America, but across the world now, are seeing the footage. Even the BBC here in England gave more attention to what was going on in Minneapolis than have been giving attention to what's going on in Tehran and the violent revolution there. This seems to have captured the imagination of the world. And not only that, only a week or so ago, we were talking about the scandalous fraud around the Somali community because of the work of Nick Shirley. Now, I want to explore what's going on. You've written a piece on your superb Substack, Public, saying, or titled, "The Left is Getting People Killed." Now, this, of course, is quite in contradiction to what left-wing media are saying, and they're very much saying this is Trump, this is his Gestapo, this is ICE. In fact, not just the media, but the governor, Tim Walz, the mayor, Fry, and basically left-wing America. Before we get into the weeds on this, perhaps, Michael, you can explain to me or people new to this story, what is going on in Minneapolis?
Sure. Well, great to be with you, Winston. It's a scary time, I think. We're seeing so many different things happening at the same time, so it's worth taking the time to unpack it. You know, a big part of what's going on here is, as you mentioned, the context is that there was a huge fraud scandal related to the Somali community in Minnesota that had basically been covered up, and there had been complicity with it, all out of something that will be very familiar to your British listeners, a fear of being called racist. So we saw this very strongly with the grooming gangs in Britain, where you have literally decades of girls being sexually exploited by mostly Pakistani Muslim men, and social workers, police not wanting to do anything about it for fear of being racist. I think we saw something very similar in Minnesota with regards to the fraud by Somalian immigrants taking state money to run daycares that didn't have any kids in them. And how big it is, we're still getting to the bottom of it, but it's in the billions of dollars.
Some people are saying up to 9 billion, right?
Yeah, that's the numbers I've heard. Yeah, that's the numbers we've heard. But this is huge. I mean, like the grooming gangs, it was going on for a really long time. It involved a lot of different people, and it means that a lot of people knew and didn't say anything. So once again, the old adage is true, the cover-up is, worse or as bad as the crime. That's sort of the broad news. Then you get to the specific efforts by ICE. This is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to essentially deport people that came here illegally, with a special focus on people that are under criminal prosecution or criminal suspects. I think most people don't realize that 64% of all migrants that have been detained since Trump took office are either being prosecuted for criminal activity separate from entering the country illegally, or are under suspicion of criminal activity. And that was the context for the shooting of Alex Preddy, the 37-year-old man who was killed last Saturday, is that the ICE agents were trying to apprehend somebody who was accused of very serious crimes. What I pointed out, and I had sort of had this response as soon as Renee Good, who had been killed, I guess a couple of weeks earlier, when she drove her car perpendicularly into the middle of an ICE operation, which was that the left is getting people killed. And that's not to say that the police or that the ICE officers behaved well. I don't think that they did. I think they didn't get the training that they've needed. It's not been well run. Also, you have the lack of cooperation with local law enforcement. And so you don't have enough law enforcement. I think this is one of the interesting parts of the story as well, which is that the accusation is that they are over-policing the situation. They're actually under-policing the situation. And just yesterday we learned that in fact Alex Preddy had been tackled and had wrestled with law enforcement 11 days earlier before he was killed, and they let him go. And in fact, if they had detained him, prosecuted him, a judge could have taken away his gun. They could have put a restraining order on him so that if he had been seen near an ICE operation, he could have been arrested on site, and that could very well have saved his life. But I think pulling back, the context here is that we are a country just deeply divided, as we knew, because of and particularly over this issue of migration. Minnesota seems like would be like a moderate Midwest country. Midwest state. Its population is really a lot of Norwegian migrants had come there. In fact, the Democratic Party in Minnesota has always been pretty far left. It's been a socialist movement, essentially a farm and labor movement that consolidated into the Democratic Party. So it's got a different history than many other Democratic parties. But at this point, it's just very radicalized. In a larger context, you have to understand, and this is very familiar to me because I come from the radical left. I understand how sophisticated the radical left can be. And we now know that there is a very organized operation to interrupt and interfere with and intervene inside of ICE operations by, there's signal groups, the text messaging groups have, hundreds of people on them. They're very well organized. They're taking down license plate numbers of, supposed ICE vehicles. And then as we saw in the most recent video, you see just very aggressive efforts to interfere in law enforcement operations. And the latest video shows Alex Preddy kicking and destroying the taillight of an ICE vehicle, spitting on an ICE officer, yelling at him, yelling, assault me, and dropping a lot of F-bombs at the law enforcement officer. Again, this is not to say that in any way the shooting was justified. I don't think it was. I think there should be a full investigation. But the left is provoking and instigating and seeking violent clashes. So the responsibility, I think, for me, is on the left here. The left does not need to be putting people in harm's way in that way. I think they're using people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy as essentially cannon fodder, convincing them that they're fighting Nazis, giving them an opportunity to be heroes in their own minds, but essentially leading them to their deaths. And so for that reason, I think this is a very powerful indictment of the left and the tactics that it's using to oppose these ICE raids.
So let's just explore the left concept then. So I see this from a distance, and it reminds me of Portland, Oregon, where there were autonomous zones. I believe there are now in Minneapolis. There are protests, as in there are marches, people with placards, and then there are protests where people are deliberately trying to thwart ICE operations, right? Those are distinct, right? They're not the same, right? So then, as you're sort of indicating there, there's sort of organized groups, and there's also accusations that this is George Soros funded. I've not heard anyone say this is Antifa exactly, but that's obviously what was happening in Portland. Is this Antifa? New York City's premier festival of ideas returns. Dissident Dialogues is back. That's right, Dissident Dialogues, a place for dangerous ideas, which we launched in 2024. It returns this year, 2026, this time to the heart of Manhattan. I am thrilled to be hosting once again, and I want to meet you. I want to see you there, and I am pleased to announce that our headline debate will see the one and only Glenn Greenwald going head-to-head with the mighty Coleman Hughes. The topic, does Israel control America? But that's not all. There will be a whole day of the world's greatest minds debating the most contentious issues of our time, all in one place. Sponsored by Unheard and our exclusive streaming partners, Rumble. We invite you all to join us on the 26th of April 2026 at Gotham Hall live. Get your tickets now at www.dissidentdialogues.org and stay tuned as many more speakers and debates will be announced very soon. You'll find it all at www.dissidentdialogues.org. Glenn Greenwald versus Coleman Hughes, please, you don't want to miss it. Get your tickets right now.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if anybody knows, and I'm not sure that it really matters. I'm I think people think that Antifa is an organization, and if you define organization as just a bunch of people working together, then I suppose it is. But the power of the left is its ability to move inside and outside of organizations quite brilliantly. And so often we find people that are working for government agencies, people that are working for nonprofit organizations. You would never find their names on a list belonging to, so for example, a nonprofit 501c3 organization or what we call an NGO. I think these people are not organized in that way. But if you mean, is it anarchist in the sense of being, radically decentralized with very, they come on and off of signal groups. That's one of the things that Cam Higbee and other, independent journalists have found is that they sort of create these signal groups that come and down really quickly. Then when they get infiltrated, then they shut them down. And similarly with these actions, now you sort of said, is the peaceful protest and then the more violent, aggressive protests where they're interfering in law enforcement, are they different, are they the same? That's another very important left strategy. It's to have peaceful protests where then people move out of them and engage in more violent activities. And so for me, Winston, I think the key thing to understand here is that there's really two separate strategies that you can see, really left or right could be using at any given time. One is this history of peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience. It's a tradition that I've engaged in myself. I believe is critically important. It was pioneered by Henry David Thoreau in the 19th century to protest the US war with Spain over Cuba. It was then picked up by Mahatma Gandhi and obviously, contributed, if not was the central factor in resulting in independence of South Asia from the British Empire, and then most famously picked up by Martin Luther King, but it's also been used by environmental groups. Nonviolent civil disobedience involves deliberately putting yourself in a situation where you're breaking the law and you're going to be arrested as a protest against the system. The goal, when that's done well, is that nobody gets hurt. It's nonviolent. So the goal is not to have any physical harm come the way of protesters. And the ones I've been involved with are very well organized, and you often are communicating with the police. It's somewhat orchestrated. The really big ones, there was one on saving the redwoods in California. 1,000 people got arrested. Bonnie Raitt was one of them. This is back in, I think, 1996 or 1997. And it was just very well organized, and it was out to make a statement and generate news coverage. What we're seeing in Minnesota is extremely different from that. It is a direct effort to interfere in law enforcement operations. You see, for example, in the manual, there's like a training manual that was used to oversee this. In that manual, Winston, they instruct people that they should call 911. They should call the police on ICE officers and ICE operations without telling the dispatcher that what they're witnessing is an ICE operation, with the clear goal to create a clash between local police and ICE officers. This is exceedingly dangerous because this does happen. It happens before where you see law enforcement on both sides of some sort of an armed conflict, people get hurt and killed. So they're literally deceiving 911 dispatchers and telling them that they're witnessing an armed kidnapping. Now, I think at this point, hopefully the 911 dispatchers in Minneapolis know that what's happening here, but I think that gives you a sense that this is a very different strategy from the kind of peaceful, nonviolent protest strategy that's been used by Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Henry David Thoreau over the centuries. This is much more similar to a guerrilla revolutionary strategy as used by Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, where essentially small groups of guerrillas attack the military and then trigger a reaction from the military, hurting civilians and therefore creating a backlash to build your revolutionary movement. Similarly, you could say this is what Osama bin Laden did when he attacked the World Trade Center on 9/11, is that he wanted to provoke an even larger reaction from the United States, and he succeeded. So to some extent, and I think this is the challenge to the Trump administration, I think that the left has succeeded in instigating an overreaction from law enforcement. And in that sense, I think the Trump administration has played into their hands, because I don't really think that they understood, what they were dealing with or how quickly this kind of activity can spiral out of control.
Michael.
At Raising Cane's, we focus on making the most critical chicken finger meals, getting them right every time. That's why we hand batter every chicken.
I've been on sildenafil for years. It handles the blood flow, but my mind just doesn't stay in the game. You do realize...
Michael, you've conflated all of the left with these the activity of these people in Minneapolis, and as you speak, I sort of remember January 6th, and I think it would be wrong to conflate those who went to the Capitol on January 6th, not only with all the right, but even with those who were at the preceding Trump rally. Likewise, Charlottesville in 2017, I think to claim that the right wing, the far right agitators on that day represent all of MAGA or indeed all of conservatives in America is incorrect. But it seems when I hear you that you are saying that this does represent one whole movement. Am I right in understanding that?
Well, I think it's actually a really good comparison because remember, after January 6th, I mean, virtually everybody on the right in the Republican Party just denounced the people that broke the law, that violated the law by entering into the Capitol, the people that engaged in violence. It was broadly denounced on both the right and left. What we've seen in Minnesota is something very different. We've seen the lieutenant governor who urged people to put their bodies on the line. We've seen the governor of Minnesota repeatedly compare ICE officers to the Nazis, to the Gestapo, comparing the criminals that the ICE is going after as Anne Frank, which is just offensive. I mean, you don't have to be Jewish just to be offended by the idea that offering $3,500 to people that are here illegally and a free flight back to their home countries is somehow the same as Nazis rounding up people for death camps. It's extremely offensive and it's incendiary because, I think there's a lot of us that are older that we kind of go, well, the left is always calling people fascists and Nazis. I think younger people, Gen Z, millennials, may actually believe that. And there's only one right response to Nazis, as we've learned from Hollywood and the news media and in schools for, really decades. Which is the only right way to deal with Nazis is to kill them. I mean, that's, think of Inglourious Bastards,
Not sure about fighting
Quentin Tarantino movie, and that's the heroism that we all desire. It's the easiest villain in Hollywood. So, in a sense, Winston, yeah, I am indicting the entire left. Now, that's not to say that there's not some, people on the left that have denounced these tactics, people on the center left, but when you look at elected leaders, such as Tim Walz, Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, when you look at the media and the way that the media has framed this issue, really as one of fascist jackboots, arresting innocent people, I do think that the left is getting people killed. And I am more comfortable making that statement, obviously, to the extent to which there's people on the left or identify on the left that denounce this kind of tactic, that's great. But yes, I do think that there's blood on the hands of what we would call the left, in which I would include, virtually all of the Democratic Party and the mainstream news media.
Wow. I mean, you're basically emphasizing that this is the left's fault, but you have actually said in this conversation that there's a problem of lack of training with ICE. I mean, do you have criticisms of ICE? You've sort of hinted at them and there are problems there. What are those problems that you actually think are serious that need to be addressed?
Well, there's a lot of them, so we'll spend some time on it. I don't think any of this is particularly well thought through by the Trump administration. I don't think the Trump administration has considered how progressives, people on the left, Democrats, would take advantage of the situation. They have taken advantage of the situation. And we knew before this latest round that, you have something like 70 to 80% of the public that supports closing the border. That's a consensus view. Many Democrats have now come out and said, hey, it was a mistake for Biden to leave the border open. We know that when you start doing ICE raids, when ICE is raiding, is arresting people at Home Depot, those numbers go way down, closer to 40%. We also know that approval of Trump's handling of migration is now well below 50%, even though it was well above 50% and was maybe the number one factor along with inflation for why Trump got elected. So I don't think there was any serious thought among the Trump administration for the reaction to these raids and the consequences of them. Now, I think to understand where they were coming from, I think the strategy very clearly is to essentially scare away and get people to self-deport. I think that's, very, very clearly what they've been doing. And
that's been
there's
successful,
mixed-
right? There's been a lot of self-deportation.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I interviewed experts on both sides, pro-migration, anti-immigration experts. The challenge is that we know 600,000 people last year were deported through channels that we can count that number of people. The Trump administration is saying an additional 1.4, 1.5 million people self-deported. That number comes from looking at census data and a declining number of people answering or identifying as being here illegally. One of the challenges with that data is that it's self-reported. I think it's mostly telephone by the census, and the number of people reporting being here illegally has been going down for a long time. And so what really more pro-migration people say is they say, we don't know if anybody's self-deported because it could be that they're just too scared now to respond to the US Census, which is the US government bureau. I do think that the consensus at this point has tilted more towards the side that a significant number of people have self-deported. It seems intuitive that some people would be self-deporting given all the attention to this, but that is setting aside whether and how many people have self-deported. I think that's clearly the Trump administration's motives, but I think there is some broader concern. So I mentioned first, there's sort of like, what will the political reaction be and what will the reaction on the ground be? When you get to that, I mean, you have had, this last round obviously is disastrous because you have two people that, were killed, where you have ICE officers that I think any reasonable investigation will find that they, shouldn't have, shot Renee Good or Alex Preddy. Now, in the case of Alex Preddy, I don't think, there was people that went online and said this was a deliberate assassination. They say, oh, they took his gun and then they assassinated him. It doesn't look to me like the one officer, there's apparently two officers, but the officer that most of us see in the video who's shooting Alex Preddy, there's no evidence to me that he knew that Alex Preddy had been disarmed. I think what he was responding to, and we should know more if there's a proper investigation, is people yelling gun, gun, gun. So it looks like what happens is, and this is all happening within seconds, one person takes the gun, and at that moment somebody yells gun, 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 and then the officer fires into the back of Alex Preddy. I am much more sympathetic to I'm empathic to all sides here because I think that, and I've gotten people very mad at me, like after the Uvalde school shooting happened and everybody wants to just say, oh, the officers are just cowards. My point is always that when you are just blaming the person on the front lines, you are not holding responsible the people that are responsible for their training, for their deployment. And I think for me, that's where, obviously the officers responsible should be held accountable, but really the whole system should be held accountable. So that means the director of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff who's overseeing this. They've dismissed now the person who was in charge of the Minnesota operations. There's some recognition that obviously things went south.
That's Bovino. That's Gregory Bovino, and they brought in Tom Homan, the famous immigration czar, to sort things out.
Who should have been in charge of the operation from the beginning. Yeah. I'll just say one more thing, Winston, is that then I just think it was wrong, and exactly. Kind of unconscionable and honestly bizarre for Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller to both come out and call Alex Preddy a domestic terrorist, to claim that he was going to assault the police officers. There was no evidence of any of that. Tone deaf, dumb, unethical. I've criticized Stephen Miller before. I understand why Trump likes him. He feels like he needs a tough guy there, but I think that he's at this point a liability. I think the issue here is that the country is divided and you need to be doing things that a majority of Americans support. I think Americans do support going after people that have committed criminal offenses beyond coming to the country illegally, than going after people that are just here illegally with no evidence of crimes. Support for those kinds of operations goes way down. So I think, one of the things I appreciate people are saying on X, and I also closed my second piece yesterday with it, which is that many things can be true at the same time. And I think one of those is that obviously these ICE operations, there was serious errors made and people should be held accountable. And I also think that the left is getting people killed and should also be held accountable and held responsible. And that what concerns me is that, that the left is being let off the hook here, in part because I think a lot of people just don't understand how sophisticated and deliberate these operations are to interfere in police operations. The really negative reaction to my piece from folks on the left, particularly on my Facebook page, was that, what are you saying? The left is not interfering in law enforcement operations. There's no evidence that Alex Preddy is interfering in law enforcement operations. The videos from the day of the shooting show him interfering in police operations in at least two ways. The first is waving through traffic, and the second was getting right up into in front of this ICE officer who was tussling with a woman. And people say, oh, well, he's just defending a woman from an ICE officer. That's interfering in a police operation. And so this idea that somehow, if you see a police officer arresting somebody on the street and you go put yourself in between the police officer and the person they're arresting, you're interfering in a police operation and putting yourself in danger doubly, triply, or 10 times more when you're actually carrying a weapon, carrying a pistol, which in the new video you can see is just tucked right in his sweatpants. It looks as though Preddy is seeking out a conflict. There were people on my Instagram page saying it's suicide by cop. I can't make that judgment. I don't think we have enough information to make that judgment. But that is extremely reckless behavior to have a pistol sticking out of your pants, and then wrestling with the police. And so I think that people get offended when you point out that Preddy played a role here because they think you're blaming the victim. But I'm saying these two things can be true. The officers behaved inappropriately, but Preddy also was interfering in a police operation and putting himself and the people around him in grave danger.
So looking at this distance, I remember, and I've already referenced January 6th, the Ashley Babbitt in the Capitol building. And if you remember that video, if you take it just as the video and just completely forget about all the context, it sort of looks like murder. It's kind of horrifying. But when you think, oh, actually, she really shouldn't have been in there for the first place, then it gets harder and harder to defend. What's strange here is it seems to be a sensible position would be to take it that Preddy killing is a similar thing, is he shouldn't have been there antagonizing police. And so horrifying as the killing should be, it's like the first mistake was that. And for me, it seems similar to Ashley Babbitt. Am I wrong in comparing the two?
Ashley Babbitt.
I think it's a really interesting and useful comparison. I think, was Ashley Babbitt armed?
It's not clear from the video that the person who killed Ashley Babbitt could see whether or not she was armed, and I don't remember there being evidence of her being armed, but maybe she was.
Yeah, I think, so that's one question. Preddy was armed, and so I think I'm very comfortable saying that I'm confident that he would not have been shot had he not been armed. Now, as soon as you say that, people in the United States say, oh, but the Second Amendment, he had the right to have a gun. Fair enough. I agree with that. I support the Second Amendment. But I'm also just saying you are clearly putting yourself in danger. You're making yourself more vulnerable by having a gun. That's one of the great ostensible paradoxes. It's not really a paradox, but it appears to be a paradox, that having a gun on you makes you vulnerable to violence. And so, this is actually a really old debate. It is most famous around rape, where there was at least the left would say that when people would point out that women who put themselves in danger would get raped, and then people on the right would say, or people on the left would say, oh, you're blaming the victim. I actually don't think that's fair or accurate. In other words, and I'm a big personal security person. I've been in war zones when I was 17 years old, in Central America, in the Congo. I've been to extremely dangerous places. In my work on homelessness, I went into very dangerous places. I'm obsessed with personal security. I take personal security extremely important. My children are sick of hearing me talk about it. I'm now taking my students here at the University of Austin into dangerous neighborhoods to interview people on the street who describe seeing murders and assaults. I think it's important to be able to go into dangerous places. So I'm not someone that's like saying, oh, Alex Preddy should not have been there at all. I think he could have been there and could have been filming from a distance. He got himself in the middle of a police operation. So it's, I'm like, as you know, and I wrote a book about it, San Francisco. I think that you should be able to, I think a mother and a child or a mother with a baby should be able to walk through every neighborhood in America. Like that for me is like a minimum of civilization. That you can't do that right now in many, many places. And I think it's wrong and we should stop. At the same time, like, I would be very upset if I found out that my daughter or any of my students were going into dangerous neighborhoods, dressed inappropriately, with the wrong shoes, at the wrong time of day, without people around them, without being protected. So I think that you can have two ideas at once. One is that, yeah, we should not be vulnerable to, ill-trained police officers or law enforcement officers. They should be well trained. At the same time, you also have a responsibility to protect yourself and to take personal responsibility. And I think that a lot of this reaction against what
that's LaCroix.
I've been saying has been by people that just don't want to give any ground to the idea that Freddie may have played a role in his own death. It's just viewed as super taboo to suggest that people that have been killed or hurt in some way, bear some responsibility for their safety. But I just think that if we don't communicate that hard truth, then people are going to go through life or going to be engaged in these protests with a false sense of invulnerability. And when I look at Renee, with the way that Renee Good was behaving, and you look at how Alex Pretty were behaving, they had a false sense of invulnerability. And we need to communicate very loudly to people that is extremely dangerous to have that false sense of invulnerability. You go put yourself in the middle of a law enforcement operation, you are putting yourself and others at risk, particularly if you are armed. And if you think that that's somehow blaming the victim, tough luck. I would much rather put that warning out there and save future lives than risk offending somebody who thinks that somehow I'm blaming the victim.
Yeah, it seems like from both videos that they could have quite easily just put their hands up and just de-escalated the situation, but some people are saying that of ICE. Now, although I appreciate the difficult situation that ICE are in,
it is true of ICE as well. The difference is that we have a Democrat. This is the other point I think is important. You may not like what ICE is doing. Like, you may have voted against Trump. You may want to protest it. I fully support your ability to protest and all that. But we live in a democracy whereby, when you lose, the laws are being enforced sometimes in ways you don't like. You definitely have the right to protest. I'll defend to my death the right for you to protest. But that's not the same as interfering in a law enforcement operation. We have a democratically elected government where the police are going to carry out operations. Interfering in those operations is crossing a line. You're going from nonviolent civil disobedience or journalism to interfering in a police operation. For me, that's not a subtle difference. That's just a huge leap into something qualitatively different.
So one thing you did mention is the idea that he shouldn't have been carrying a weapon into that sort of a situation. And this has been ridiculed by a lot of commentators and those on the left. I watched Jon Stewart's monologue on this, and he can't believe that right-wingers, and I'm not accusing you of being a right-winger, but he can't believe that right-wingers are saying you shouldn't have been carrying a gun. And I do remember, of course, the Rittenhouse case where the right were, of course, supporting Kyle Rittenhouse in 2020 when he crossed into Wisconsin, I think it was, to defend property. He had a gun and he killed people. He was found guilty by, he was found innocent by a jury of murder, but it is the case that he was carrying a gun into an area he knew that there were protests. I'm not comparing the situation of Rittenhouse as in what he was walking into, but it is strange that is there a double, maybe I'll phrase it like that, is there a double standard when it comes to where and when you can take a gun depending on what your political outlook is?
Yeah, first of all, I like the comparisons. You can do comparisons with George Floyd. There's obviously, you should talk about the similarities and differences in each of these cases. I think the Kyle Rittenhouse comparison is totally fair. I did not defend Kyle Rittenhouse. I think it's insane to bring an assault rifle, as he did, into that situation. Is it legal? Yeah, it is legal. We have the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment exists so that we can resist tyranny. Was he legally justified in doing so? Absolutely. I'm also justified in saying I think it's crazy, and I think he was looking for a fight. And people that sort of deny that, I think they're being deliberately misleading. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse was looking for a fight. Now you can say, oh, well, he was looking to defend property. Well, sure. I mean, that he can say that. That's fine, but he's not a law enforcement officer. He's not a trained law enforcement officer. He's not part of any sort of structure or discipline group. And so, yeah, it's just vigilantism. And, you know, I think it's actually a really interesting situation because there was another video that went out by a reporter. I think her name is Natalie West.
Pretty good
very young
today,
reporter.
yeah.
Where somebody in Minneapolis falsely claims that she's ICE, and she's filming these people accusing her of being ICE and telling her to get the F out of there. It's this incredible video. It's just a local person being like, get the F out of here. And she's like, we're not ICE. And they're like, get out of here anyway. Well, I'm sorry. Like, you can say that. Your First Amendment right to tell me to get out of here, but I'm legally allowed to be here. I mean, this is you're on public, roads, sidewalks. She's allowed to be there. These are essentially these are sort of unarmed at this point, or non-violent to some extent militias. So you're looking at the creation of militia structures. Again,
But if it's unarmed, not a militia, right? How could it be you have an unarmed militia?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, as we talk about it, they are armed. I think many of them are armed. I mean,
Right.
I think we keep in mind is that the militias are it's legal. Like, it's legal to be organized. It's legal to be organized in that way. To some extent, I think our founding fathers with the Second Amendment were defending that kind of thing. They're defending armed militias. And I actually, especially since I worked on the First Amendment, I've changed my mind on the Second Amendment. I actually, do understand much more viscerally why you have a Second Amendment in the United States. I had a friend of mine who said,
It's SMDI. You talking about gaming? I game sometimes, just not lately. Is today the day? Should I game today?
If the Jews had been armed in Germany and Poland, then you probably wouldn't have had the Holocaust. Whether or not that's the case is a very dramatic point to make. So, on the one hand, I think that these things are always double-edged swords, which is that, on the one hand, I mean, it is a protection against tyranny, and I support it. On the other hand, you're going to get people killed that way. And I just think you have to be in these things eyes wide open. And I see a lot of these, particularly men, radicalized left-wing men, like the man that was telling the young woman to, get the F out of this neighborhood. You see them really full of excitement and pride and a sort of righteous anger. They're looking for confrontations.
So just so
Igor is the coach, so he bought a .coach domain name with Squarespace, so you can book him and call him Coach.
There's nothing like that feeling of having a stylish sanctuary to call your own.
I'm not sure if you saw the news, but Fox News is claiming President Trump is declining in the polls, and President Trump responded.
So just so I've understood this, so you're saying you've changed on the Second Amendment, and now you support the Second Amendment. I've understood that correctly, assuming that you maybe didn't, or is it the other way around? You support?
No, I mean, I never really had I don't have a record of having worked against the Second Amendment. I mean, I never thought that you could get rid of the Second Amendment, and never proposed that we do that. But I think for me, Winston, what changed is working on the First Amendment and realizing how tyrannical our governments, our deep states can become. I feel like I finally understood at this really deep level why we have a Second Amendment. I mean, God forbid that we would ever need to take up arms. But the idea of the Second Amendment is that we can be heavily armed so that we can create armed militias to resist the government, if and when it becomes tyrannical.
But this is what the progressives, like Alex Pretty, it seems, are doing in action. They think the government is tyrannical and that it's literally Nazis, and they are armed against federal officers. So is this the sort of right-wing idea of defending against a tyrannical government in action?
I mean, I will say, I think Preddy, that new video shows him just absolutely out of control and reckless. And I mean, sorry to be mean about it, but he just looks crazed.
And this is from earlier, this is from January 13th. So he was killed on January 24th, but this is the video that's emerged from January 13th, where he kicks the backlight out of a nice car.
And says, he yells, "Assault me." And then you can see him, they're trying to put him to ground. He's resisting going to ground. I mean, and then he has his gun sticking out of his sweatpants. I mean, here they arrest him to the ground. I'm shocked that they didn't pull the gun out at that point. I mean, it's amazing that he wasn't shot then. So I think that, on the one hand, I think that the structures that they formed, that the left has formed in Minnesota, are the kinds of militia structures that we have tended to see on the right in the United States. They're also the structures that I think our founding fathers imagined that you would create to resist tyranny. I just think if you're being honest about it, that's what it is. But then I think you get people like Alex Preddy, who are not under some organized command, and they're clearly out there emerging out of, mostly peaceful demonstrations to engage in he's clearly trying to get into a fight. There's no way you look at these videos and see anything different from that. And
sorry, Michael, it seems like you're contradicting what you said earlier. Forgive me if I'm just being slow here, but you're saying that seemingly peaceful protests which are not organized, but at the start you said that they were organized through signal chats. They were, instigating and operating together. So can you square me those two things?
Well, I think that what you have is an extremely well organized. They have a manual. They have signal groups. They have deep relationships with each other. They have clear strategies. That part is very organized. But then within it, and I don't know that Alex Preddy was in those groups. There's some talk that maybe he was, and maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. But then I think that you get that structure in place, and then I think there's two things. The first is that it can then become armed, in which case you have an armed militia movement. And again, that's legal. Under the First and Second Amendments, you can do that. But I do think you have to be aware that you're going to have some people that maybe are not wholly controllable, particularly if it's anarchist. The whole idea of anarchism is that you either don't have leaders or it's extremely decentralized so that you have very small cells or very small groups. And I think that just you have to accept, if you're doing that as the left, you have to accept that there is some chance that the people that are most comfortable taking risks, feel that they have the least to lose, or maybe that have the least amount of emotional control, who are the most comfortable bringing a gun to an event like that, are going to engage in these really dangerous behaviors. And so it's, again, all these things can be true. One can support the legal right, the First and Second Amendment rights, to have an armed militia, and also say, look, if you're going to do that, then you are also responsible. You have some responsibility for when one of the members of your supposedly, highly decentralized movement engages in violence and gets himself killed and potentially gets others killed. All these things can be true at the same time.
Right. So one thing that you did that I thought was very interesting in your public piece is to explore the ideology of the left that got to this point. I mean, it's pretty clear if you come in on this topic new that the reason these people are protesting is they see ICE as you've said, as pure evil, and it's because they're pro-immigration and they don't consider these people as illegal immigrants. Here in Britain we have the same problem. You can't even say illegal immigrants, they'll correct you. They go, no, you mean irregular immigration, because even that sort of no one is illegal is the kind of the riposte that they'll say is it's sort of moral judgment by calling them illegal, even though it's just a statement of fact. And that seems to be the sort of core differing principle where if from my point of view, if you cross the border illegally, you're a criminal, and you shouldn't have done that, and you should be deported back to where you came from. But that's a completely the opposite of where these people have come, and they code it like the Nazis, as you've described. I'm interested in kind of examining that. You've done a phenomenal job in your work of looking at the personality traits of leaders, individuals, famously Justin Trudeau, the former Canadian Prime Minister, and it showed how he had narcissist personality traits, and that was affecting how he was making the decisions. Can you explain to me what personality traits are tied up to these groups of people? Is it personality or is it just ideology? I mean, are we all a mix of the same
hey, thanks, Ooze, appreciate you.
Evenly spread personalities, or in these geolocations like Portland, like Minneapolis, are they accumulating certain personalities?
Okay, very important question, and I'm going to try to be extremely precise in how I use my language so that I don't, I think, either kind of misrepresent what we know. So I think the first thing is psychologists, the consensus among psychologists, and I believe it's even part of organization, the American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, never to diagnose any individual from afar or without, having done some intensive set of having them fill out questionnaires. So I'm not a psychologist, would never diagnose anybody. At the same time, I think it's fair to point out certain behaviors that are consistent with the behaviors that we would associate with cluster B personality disorders. By the way, in Britain, they don't, distinguish between. We have different categories in our psychological manual. In Britain, this is more cluster B, but narcissism and psychopathy being, two of these personality disorders. So just to take narcissism, there was a fantastic study done by Swiss psychologists, I believe it's 2020 or 2021, on left authoritarianism, and left-wing authoritarianism being defined as supporting essentially violent revolution, violent overthrow of the system in the name of inequality and oppression. They find that the people that are high on those left-wing authoritarian values are indistinguishable essentially from people with narcissistic personality disorder. And narcissism has a lot of different characteristics, but one of them is entitlement. There's a very strong sense that I should be able to get into fight with police officers with a gun in my waist and have no harm come to me, or drive my car into the middle of a police operation and no harm come to me. I think it's a sense of entitlement. I also think it's a detachment from reality, which is also one of the characteristics. It's just being completely oblivious to what the effect of your behavior is on others. And then the willingness, basically being on the opposite side in terms of personality from neuroticism, so very high comfort with risk. This is one of the defining characteristics of people that we call psychopaths, people that are essentially treat others as means to an end. And so we see extremely risky, behaviors by people that are left-wing authoritarians. And again, not diagnosing anybody, but pointing out that there's these behaviors. And I think many psychologists would agree that people can manifest those behaviors in certain situations, but maybe like when you're a nurse at the hospital, you don't demonstrate those behaviors. You might just demonstrate those behaviors engaged in politics, or they might emerge in a group setting. But I do think the evidence is very clear that we've seen an increase in narcissism, society-wide for a lot of reasons, going all the way back to the 70s. I mean, arguably it goes back a lot further than that. And look, some of these characteristics are all can be really positive things to some extent, because if you don't take risks, if you're too neurotic, that's also dysfunctional. So these things are always on the spectrum. I think it is useful to think about these character types or these behaviors. There's another super analysis of this called political ponerology by a late Polish psychologist named Andrew Łobaczewski, where he describes, he calls them the spellbinders in communist totalitarian movements, but also the Nazi movements. He analyzes totalitarianism, who are the spellbinders of the narcissists. They're very charismatic. They recruit people into the movement. And then the enforcers, he would describe more as the psychopaths, who are really unfeeling. They're actually kind of shut down emotionally, who enforce these awful edicts in communist systems. And you start to see that here, I think, where you see people that are essentially putting people in almost a trance-like state. You do see people kind of really swept up in it. Oh, I'm, here to, save the world, grandiosity being another characteristic of narcissism. So yeah, I do see those traits and characteristics without defining or diagnosing anybody. I think we see them at the individual level. I think we see them at the group level.
So yeah, that jump is interesting to me to the group level, right? Because it's strange, as I've said, we see it in Portland. It was kind of citywide hysteria. We see it now in Minneapolis. We saw it in Seattle. We've seen it in little pockets here and there, but we don't see it everywhere. We don't see it in Miami. We don't see it particularly in Austin, I don't think. Every time I've been in Austin, actually, but maybe I'm wrong about that. We don't see it in Phoenix. There are some more conservative cities that this is not a phenomenon. So is there something about group hysteria that turbocharges what we're seeing at the individual level?
I wouldn't call it hysteria, and by the way, I think it is very interesting. So let's just take the autonomous zones. So we saw them in Portland. So Portland had an autonomous zone. It was called CHOP, and then it changed its name to CHAZ. It was a few blocks downtown. It was, you had to be very organized to take over this place. They, secured it. They also negotiated with the mayor and the city council to not have the police come in and shut it down, which is insane. I mean, it's madness. But just consider the amount of entitlement that's involved in taking over, having private citizens organizing to take over a part of town that has, first of all, residents in it who never voted to suddenly be governed by an unaccountable and unelected militia rather than by the police that that is under the control of the mayor who they did elect. If they didn't support, they have some. So you've basically taken over, and that is an act of extreme entitlement, and I would argue narcissism at the group level, to say, well, we're just going to take over this part of town without getting anybody's permission that actually lives there, much less from the broader city that effectively owns, the public owns the sidewalks and the roads and, much also that infrastructure. So that is incredibly, entitled. It's also very grandiose in the sense that the language they're using is that they're going to take over this part of town and they're going to usher in a revolution, essentially, that it's going to sort of spread, and that's how they're going to get anarchism. I mean, it is really crazy when you actually listen to the things that they're talking about. So, Seattle, Winston, I mean, the police chief, who I had an exclusive interview with for my book, San Francisco, she was repeatedly saying, you can't allow this, like, as a civilization. That's the breakdown of civilization. And yet the mayor and the city council had effectively allowed it. Winston, one young black man got killed. They continued to allow the autonomous zone to continue. It took a second young black man, I think he was 16, getting murdered in the autonomous zone before they allowed the police chief and her officers to go and shut it down. So, and the mayor famously said about the autonomous zone, maybe it'll be the summer of love. I mean, that is delusional. I mean, that is complete detachment from reality. They're in a dream world. That's the part that I find, so alarming, is that you just kind of repeatedly get people that are they're just lost in their fantasy, but they're doing things in the real world that are exceedingly dangerous, and yet they don't see it. The people around them that are all fully indoctrinated don't see it because they're mapping onto reality some fantasy that they've got in their head that's basically a fantasy that was constructed by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century, by Marx in the 19th century, by Foucault and others in the 20th century, that has just absolutely no awareness that, these are the kind of situations that result in murder, in sexual assault, in violence. It's just, it's scary because how detached they are.
You're showing how scary it is in these specific zones, but it is still curious to me how these specific zones come about. I mean, maybe it's not actually a reflection of the entire city. It's just that they're more organized in these cities and they come to specific zones. Is that more accurate, perhaps?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's very important that we don't think of this as a kind of hysteria or a panic. These autonomous zones are just a latest manifestation of an exceedingly well-organized somewhat decentralized movement, and they're decentralized in part so that they're much more difficult to shut down or challenge or expose, because, you know, like, again, one signal group is exposed, they shut it down, they create a new one. It's you know, what some French philosophers called rhizomic, meaning like it's like more like a mushroom structure where you've got a deep, and I think it's a really good picture of it, or like the aspen tree, you know, we call it aspen trees, but they're actually it's a single entity, you know, subterranean entity they can't see, that then sprouts up various shoots, but then it gets shut down, but that underlying structure still exists. And that underlying structure is built on a very complete ideology that has answers to absolutely every criticism or any question. So when you go into those situations and you interview the leaders and you ask them, what about people getting killed? What about like the rights of the people that are here? They have answers for every one of those questions, which is what allows them to remain kind of trapped in those fantasies and unable to escape.
Right. And now you can get it here. The parts you need, right where you can get them. Parts.cat.com.
You were up and moving before anyone else was up and moving. At RW Knutson, we crush.
Right, so I think there's one other aspect just that's a flaw in perhaps how I presented things, which is that I sort of painted the picture of anti-immigration ideology. I think this stems back to, in fact, you've written about this brilliantly, Karl Popper, the Open Society, post-war, a kind of response to never again. You know, it was right to look at Second World War and go, and the horrors of Auschwitz and go, never again. And we learned some wrong lessons. R.R. Reno, who I know you've spoken about, he's been on the show, explores this in his phenomenal book, The Strong Gods. And that's certainly very interesting. But on this specific issue, we're looking at Minneapolis. Actually, these protesters did not protest when Biden expelled, I think in the region of, I haven't got exact numbers here, but some people say up to 4 million. Obama expelled in the region of at least 3 million. George W. Bush, some numbers I've got here as high as 10 million if you include returns, but 2 million formal removals. Deporting illegal immigrants has been the case now for 4 or 5 of the previous presidents, whether they be Democrats or Republicans. So why then this sudden different tack to Trump's and ICE than beforehand, than previously?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I want to make one other observation I think is super important, which is that the people involved in these anti-ICE protests are the exact same people that were involved in Black Lives Matter. I mean, you would just, like, there is a single left. I think it's a mistake to kind of go,
got my breakfast corn dog, doing good.
Oh, there's just a homeless, movement. There's a anti-carceral criminal justice movement. There's a, pro-migration movement. No, it's just a single omnicause left that then uses various issues when they're hot or in the news media or creating confrontation to opportunistically respond. Now, I do think we have seen the left sometimes break with Democrats. Maybe the most important moment here for the radical left was Occupy Wall Street, which was another, absolutely brilliant, tactically anarchist, movement to protest the big bailouts, and that all occurred under Obama. Black Lives Matter started under Obama, and again, I think it's fair to say they weren't attacking necessarily Obama. Some were, but that wasn't the main focus. Then, but they're always at, they're always in those moments being criticized by mainline Democrats or the Democrats in power, saying, "Hey, you guys are undermining what we're doing." So then, when you get to a Republican president under Trump, then you've got a unified left. And I think this gets to another really essential point that I made in my second piece on the Preddy shooting, which is that the left is at their most radical, at their most the cancel culture is most intense, the violence is most intense when they feel most powerful, when they feel most confident. It's not coming from a time when they feel weak. This really, intense response that I had from people I've known for a long time on my Facebook page when I published my first piece on Preddy, their view was everybody agrees with us. In fact, you saw John Favreau,
my name is Danny. Is your name Colin?
The Pod Saves America host on X say this to Megyn Kelly, was like, you lost, we won. There's that confidence, I think is not something that they don't have that confidence and they go, oh, I'm just gonna relax with it. They're taking that's empowering them to get even more radicalized. And I think if you even pull back further, Winston, we mentioned sort of rising entitlement, rising narcissism in the culture, as just that I think that has fed to the radicalization of the left, which in my view is the biggest story, the biggest political story in the West. We've paid a lot of attention to the rise of a populist nationalist right, but that populist nationalist right could not have succeeded as it has without that radicalization of the left. And so I just don't, I mean, Trump was made by the radical left. And so, you get into there's a way in which, I think when Trump is at his most successful strategically, he's using the left. He's using the craziness of the left to build a majority support, to build a support of what Nixon famously called the silent majority. But when they err strategically, that radicalized left then represents the majority of Americans, and that's when Trump and the Republican and MAGA coalition, I think, find themselves in real trouble politically. It's the kind of thing that would result in them losing one or two houses of Congress and potentially the White House.
Sorry, when you said Favreau criticized Megyn Kelly saying that they won, what's he referring to? What's the winning he's referring to?
That the public is with the Democrats in opposition to ICE raids. So the context here is that when the second video came out showing Alex Preddy, screaming, spitting, tussling, kicking out the taillight of an ICE vehicle, Megyn Kelly posted something on X, something like, this shows that Preddy was a deranged, lunatic leftist. And then Favreau quote tweeted her and just was like, basically, shut up, you're in the minority, we're in the majority, we've won the consent of the American people on this issue, right. So shut up and move on. I think he genuinely believes that. I don't think he's...
Well, I think there's some evidence that he's might be right in that even Trump is actually not doubling down on ICE here. He clearly is concerned about what might happen in the midterms, and there has been, they're saying openly, they're going to sort of scale back a bit. So it does seem like they won. It seems like the left won on this issue when it comes to Minneapolis.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I think that's, if you are somebody that is a Trump supporter or Republican, that should concern you. Look, they erred. I think they made a huge miscalculation. I don't know, they had too many things going on at the same time. They didn't have Tom Homan on it. Obviously, they didn't have a seasoned person on it.
For real, same old shit, Hey, thank you, Ooze. Appreciate you. This interesting video is almost over. I'm about to check out this Joe Rogan episode and see who the guest is or whatever.
The new OM cheeseburger from Applebee's for $11.99. Also in our 2 for $25 menu.
Damn it. Breakfast was delicious.
Never be forgotten.
You have my heart. You always will. They will crown that boy today if they could.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Turn by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day. Come on, Roger. Yeah, fuck it. Fuck it.
Hell yeah. I love going to sleep to all these history shows and stuff. It's the best. I'll wake up and I'll learn a new part about history.
Fuck it. Go for it. Well, fuck it. We'll do it live. Do it live. That's a classic. Oh.
Yeah, that's a classic look behind the scenes. Fucking crazy people telling you the news.
Yeah, that's good. And the William Shatner one, where the studio guy, he says Shatner's doing some ADR for the cartoon, the Star Trek cartoon,
Hey, thank you.
and he says, he uses the word sabotage. And he gets corrected by the studio guys, like, Bill, it's pronounced sabotage.
Oh yeah.
Please don't correct me. It disgusts me.
Hey man, that's the idea. Is hopefully I'll wake up with some knowledge, or I'm pretty sure it does influence my dreams because I've been having cool dreams lately. So yeah, there's that.
Sickens me. And you say sabotage. I sabotage.
Cheers, yo.
And absolutely love William Shatner.
My favorite ones are the why can't I remember his name? Rosebud. Orson Welles. Jesus Christ.
Orson Welles.
What happened?
You start saying it.
I know. What happened? My brain just nope, no access. When Orson Welles was doing the Gallo wine commercials.
Oh yeah.
Remember those days? Like,
yeah.
Orson Welles.
Summer wine before its time.
I know. And he was like
everything was like a exhaustive sucking of air to come in.
So then he was making fun of how shitty the wine was in between takes. Like he was angry.
Yeah. There is a CD that you can get. I can't remember what it's called, but I have them at home, and it's like all these radio things, like where just when celebrities, lose it on while doing voiceover and ADR. It's hilarious.
Orson Welles is a crazy story, right? Because when he made that movie, when he made Citizen Kane, which was about William Randolph Hearst.
I don't want to watch this. I get bored so easily. The radicalization of America. I almost feel like watching a Fall of Civilizations episode. If I can't find something better. This was supposed to have an episode today. After that.
Finance meeting in 5
Minutes? Ramp? I got.
Years, 2 hours ago. I thought I had a membership. Come on, man. Oh, there we go. Where is this fucking working? Members I thought I was a member. Oh man. I could play some games, but I don't have Game Pass right now. So Oh, do I have to play offline?
What would you do if you found out your childhood became a source of content creation? Not by accident or because you were famous, but
Hugo can't. My shit, man.
You okay, Dad?
Yeah, 1 second. Lift.
Dad!
Dad? Oh, hey. How's the new apartment?
Are you eating?
Yeah, you know how I love those noodles and flavor packets. Oh, I wasn't expecting company or. The doctor says I should be back at work in a month.
Dad, you need help. I'm calling Pacific Source.
You might not expect your health plan to help with food insecurity.
So my daughter says that you guys can help me.
Because now the business of media is absolutely riddled with wokeists. You know, people who have gone in who have completely changed the face, particularly of big companies. You know, I mean, that building is full of very, very different people. There's a Wall Street Journal, which has got some pretty left-wing people working for it. The Times is now a very left-wing newspaper.
I'm gonna end my stream for a little bit, so I'll check my Monopoly. I'll be back in a little bit.